Billionaire receives call and hears, "Daddy, Mummy fainted because there's no food." Thomas Anderson was about to close the biggest deal of his life when his secretary urgently interrupted the meeting. Annoyed by the intrusion, he answered the phone sharply, but fell silent upon hearing the trembling voice of a boy on the other end. "Daddy, Mommy fainted because there's no food," the child's voice said, broken by sobs. "Please come help us." Thomas felt his blood run cold. His fingers gripped the phone so tightly, his knuckles turned white. The 5 executives seated across from him in the Anderson Development Conference Room watched his expression shift from irritation to absolute shock. Who is this?" he managed to stammer, loosening the Italian tie that suddenly felt suffocating. "It's Matthew, Dad, don't you remember me?" The boy's voice sounded even more desperate. "Mom's lying on the kitchen floor and won't wake up. I'm scared." Thomas tried to process the information. Matthew? What Matthew? He didn't have children. At least that's what everyone thought. His mind raced, revisiting past relationships, stopping at a specific memory from 10 years ago. Rachel Miller, his great youthful love, who had vanished without explanation just before his first big career opportunity. "Where are you, son?" he asked, already standing, signaling to his assistant. "Give me the address." With trembling hands, he wrote down the address the boy dictated between sobs. It was in an outer borough in Queens, New York, far from the luxurious office, in the financial district. "Listen, Matthew, call an ambulance, dial 911, Thomas instructed, trying to keep his voice steady. "I already tried, but they said it'll take too long. Please, come quick," the boy begged. "I'm on my way, don't hang up, keep talking to me," he said, motioning to Melissa, his secretary, that he had to leave immediately. Tadasai. Conference room fell into complete silence. The Japanese investors exchanged confused glances as Thomas hastily gathered his documents. "Gentlemen, I apologize profusely, but a family emergency has come up that I can't ignore," he declared, struggling to maintain composure. "Melissa will reschedule our meeting for tomorrow." Without waiting for a response, Thomas rushed out, the phone still pressed to his ear. In the panoramic elevator descending from the 30th floor, he tried to calm the boy while his mind buzzed with questions. Could he really have a son? Why had he never known? Why had Rachel never reached out? And why now, when he was at the peak of his career, about to close a billion-dollar deal? "Matthew, how old are you?" he suddenly asked. 11, Dad. I had my birthday last month," the boy replied, his voice slightly steadier. 11 years. The timing fit perfectly. It had been nearly 12 years since Rachel disappeared from his life without a trace. Thomas felt dizzy. He braced himself against the mirrored elevator wall as he processed the possibility of having a son he never knew. In the underground parking garage, Thomas dismissed his driver and personally took the keys to his Lexus from the valet. Within a minute, he was speeding through the streets of New York City, ignoring traffic lights and honking horns, guided only by the frightened voice of the boy on speakerphone and the GPS leading him to a world completely different from his own. As he drove deeper into Queens, the luxury high-rises gave way to modest buildings. The smooth pavement turned into potholed streets. The elegant storefronts were replaced by small neighborhood shops. It was like crossing an invisible border within the same city. "I'm almost there, Matthew. Is Mom awake?" he asked, feeling his heart race with every block. "No, she's still lying on the floor. I put a pillow under her head," the boy replied with a maturity that tugged at Thomas's heart. When he finally arrived at the address, Thomas parked his imported car in front of a 3-story building with peeling paint and a rusted iron gate. A few residents looked curiously at the man in an Italian suit and polished shoes rushing out. "To have a car worth more than the entire building?" "Apartment 302, Matthew said over the phone. "It's on the 3rd floor. The elevator doesn't work." Thomas took the worn steps 2 at a time, his heart in his throat. When he reached the 3rd floor, he saw a slightly open door. He hesitated for a second before pushing it open. The apartment was small and modest, but clean and tidy despite its simplicity. In the tiny kitchen, a woman lay collapsed on the floor. Beside her, a brown-haired boy with frightened eyes dropped the old red telephone he was holding and ran to Thomas. "Dad, you really came," he exclaimed, clinging to Thomas's legs. That word, "Dad," hit Thomas like thunder. But there was no time to process emotions. He quickly knelt beside the unconscious woman, and when he turned her face, it felt like time had stopped. It was Rachel, thinner with a few lines that hadn't been there before, but unmistakably the same Rachel he had loved so intensely in his youth. The same one who had vanished without a trace, taking with her, he now knew, his son. "She hasn't eaten in 2 days, so I could have the food," Matthew explained, tears streaming down his face. "She said everything would be okay, that the money would come soon, but today she fell and won't wake up." Thomas checked Rachel's pulse. It was weak, but there. Without a second thought, he lifted her into his arms. "We're taking her to the hospital. Now." Minutes later, the three of them were in Thomas's car, speeding toward the best private hospital in the city. Rachel, now semi-conscious in the back seat with her head resting on her son's lap, murmured incoherent words. Matthew held her hand tightly as he watched the world rush by outside the window, a world that had never been part of his reality. At the hospital, all it took was Thomas mentioning his name for doors to open. Within moments, Rachel was being attended by a team of doctors while he filled out forms at the reception desk, trying to ignore the curious glances of the staff. It wasn't every day that Thomas Anderson, one of the richest men in the United States, showed up in person with a collapsed woman and a frightened child. "Is she going to be okay?" Matthew asked, sitting in the luxurious waiting room, looking even smaller in the leather chair. Thomas looked at the boy. It was like looking into a mirror of his past, the same brown eyes, the same face shape, even the way he furrowed his brows when worried. How had he not noticed before? How had he missed 11 years of this child's life? "Yes," he replied, sitting beside the boy. "This is the best hospital in the city. They'll take good care of your mom." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. There were so many questions, so many things to say, but where to begin? "How did you get my number?" he finally asked. "Mom keeps a newspaper clipping with your picture and your company's number. She never told me anything, but I'd seen it. When she passed out, I got scared and called," the boy explained, wringing his hands. Thomas felt a pang in his chest. Rachel had kept his picture. After everything, she still held on to that connection, even if hidden. "And how did you know I was your dad?" Matthew hesitated, biting his lower lip. "I once heard Mom crying while looking at your photo in the newspaper. She said she'd done everything wrong, that she should have told you about me. After that, I started paying attention and realized we look alike." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. The conversation was interrupted by the doctor's arrival. Dr. Paul Mitchell, the hospital's clinical director and an old acquaintance of Thomas from the charity events he sponsored, seemed surprised by the unusual situation. "Mr. Anderson, the patient is stable. She suffers from malnutrition and exhaustion, along with severe anemia that appears to be chronic. This isn't something that develops in just a few days. Given her condition, she's been eating poorly for months." Thomas felt the weight of those words like a punch to the gut. "Will she be okay?" "Yes, with proper care. I recommend she stays hospitalized for a few days for nutrient replenishment and more detailed tests. We suspect an autoimmune condition may be complicating things." Matthew, who was standing beside Thomas, instinctively held his hand. The gesture, so natural coming from the boy, overwhelmed Thomas with emotion. It was the first time his son, had ever touched his hand. "Can I see my mum?" Matthew asked, his voice trembling. The doctor looked at Thomas, who nodded. "Of course, come with me," the doctor replied, extending his hand to the boy. When he was alone in the waiting room, Thomas finally let his emotions surface. He sat down, covering his face with his hands, feeling utterly lost. How could his life turn upside down in just a few hours? Suddenly, he was the father of an 11-year-old boy. Suddenly, Rachel was back in his life. Suddenly, the perfect, controlled world he'd built over years was crumbling around him. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Melissa, his assistant, was desperately trying to reach him, surely worried about the abandoned meeting with the Japanese investors. His fiancée, Lauren Thompson, heiress to a prominent New York elite family, was also calling insistently. And then there were the notifications from his directors, who must have been panicking over his sudden disappearance in the middle of a billion-dollar negotiation. But none of that seemed important now. For the first time in years, Thomas Anderson completely ignored work. He turned off his phone and went in search of his son and the woman he now realized he had never fully forgotten. In the hospital room, Rachel was awake, hooked up to IVs and monitors. She looked frightened when Thomas entered, as if seeing a ghost. Matthew was sitting on the edge of the bed holding his mother's hand. "You shouldn't have done this, son," she murmured weakly. "Mom, you fainted." "I was scared," the boy replied defensively. Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, unsure how to act. It was strange to face Rachel after so long, under circumstances so different from what he'd imagined in the rare moments he allowed himself to think of her. In his dreams, their reunion happened in an elegant restaurant, both of them successful, laughing at life's coincidences, never in a hospital room with her weakened and a shared child between them. "Thomas," she finally said with a tired sigh, "I'm sorry you got dragged into this." He took a few steps into the room, keeping a safe distance from the bed. "Why didn't you ever tell me, Rachel?" he asked, unable to hide the hurt in his voice. She looked away, fixing her gaze on the window where the New York City sky was beginning to darken. "It's a long and complicated story, and now isn't the time," she replied, subtly nodding toward Matthew. Thomas understood. There were things that couldn't be said in front of the boy, things that would need to be explained when they were alone. "Matthew, you must be hungry," said Thomas, trying to sound natural. "How about we go down to the hospital cafeteria to get something to eat?" The boy looked at his mother, hesitant. "Everything will be fine, sweetheart. I just need to rest a little," Rachel assured him, forcing a smile. "Go with your dad." That small hesitation didn't go unnoticed by Thomas. It was strange for Rachel to refer to him as Matthew's father, just as it was strange for him to hear it. But it was the truth, undeniable now in the face of the striking resemblance between the two. In the hospital cafeteria, Thomas watched fascinated as Matthew devoured a burger, fries, and a milkshake. From the way the boy ate, it was clear it had been a while since he'd had a full meal. "Easy there, champ. The food isn't going anywhere," Thomas remarked with a shy smile. Matthew looked up, embarrassed, and slowed down. "Sorry, it's really good." "No need to apologize. I just don't want you to feel sick." As he watched his son eat, Thomas tried to process the day's events. That morning, he was just a successful businessman, engaged to the woman his family had always approved of, about to close the biggest deal of his career. Now, sitting in a hospital cafeteria, he'd discovered he was the father of an 11-year-old boy whose mother was the only woman he'd ever truly loved. "Your phone is vibrating," Matthew pointed out, interrupting his thoughts. Thomas had forgotten he'd placed his phone on silent mode on the table. On the screen, Lauren's name flashed. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Where are you, Thomas? I've been trying to reach you for hours." Lauren's irritated voice came through the line. "I'm handling an emergency, Lauren. I can't talk right now," he replied, feeling uncomfortable speaking to his fiancée in front of his son. "What emergency?" "Melissa is desperate. The Japanese investors are furious. What could be more important than that meeting?" Matthew watched Thomas curiously as he sipped his milkshake. "We'll talk later, okay?" Thomas said, ending the call. Before Lauren could protest. "Was that your girlfriend?" Matthew asked with disarming frankness. Thomas hesitated. "My fiancée, actually. You're getting married?" The boy's eyes widened. "Will you have other kids?" The question, so direct and innocent, caught Thomas off guard. He'd never seriously thought about having children with Lauren. The marriage was more of a family arrangement, a business alliance than a union motivated by the desire to start a family. "We haven't thought about that yet," he replied vaguely. Matthew nodded thoughtfully and kept eating. Thomas admired the boy's resilience. In just a few hours, his life had changed drastically. He'd met the father he never knew he had, seen his mother hospitalized, and yet there he was, able to hold a conversation and show curiosity. "What about you, Matthew? What's your life like? Do you go to school?" Thomas asked, genuinely interested. The boy's face lit up. "Yeah, I'm the best in my class at math," he said proudly. "The teacher says I have a knack for numbers." "Just like me when I was your age," Thomas remarked, surprised by yet another similarity. "Really?" Matthew's eyes sparkled. "Mum always says I got that from you, but she never explains it properly." Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. What else had Rachel told him about him? How had she portrayed him to their son all these years? When they finished eating, they returned to the room. Rachel was asleep, and a nurse explained she'd been given a mild sedative to rest. The doctor had left orders not to disturb her until the next morning. "What are we going to do now?" asked Matthew, worried. "I don't want to leave. Mommy alone." Thomas thought for a moment. He couldn't just leave the boy there, nor take him to Rachel's empty apartment. "You're coming to my place tonight," he decided. "Tomorrow morning, we'll come back to see your mother, okay?" Matthew hesitated, unsure about going to the home of a man he'd just met, even if he was his father. "Can I call her when I wake up?" "Of course," Thomas assured him, "and I promise we'll be here first thing in the morning." On the way to Thomas's penthouse in the Upper East Side, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in New York City, Matthew stayed silent, watching the city lights through the window. It was a world completely different from his, filled with luxury boutiques, upscale restaurants, and towering buildings. "Do you live alone?" he suddenly asked. "Yes," Thomas replied. "Well, I have a housekeeper who comes every day, but she doesn't stay overnight. Doesn't your fiancée live with you?" "No, she still lives with her parents. We'll move in together after the wedding," Thomas explained, realizing how old-fashioned that sounded out loud. When they arrived at the building, the doorman gave Matthew a surprised look, but didn't ask questions. In the private elevator, the boy was fascinated by the buttons that went straight to the penthouse. "Wow, do you live on the top floor?" he asked, impressed. "Yes," Thomas answered, starting to see his own world through his son's awe-struck eyes. The 6,000-square-foot duplex penthouse was the ultimate symbol of Thomas's success. Decorated by a famous architect, with valuable artwork, designer furniture, and panoramic views of Central Park, it was both his sanctuary and a trophy of his achievements. Matthew stepped in timidly, as if afraid he might break something just by looking. "Come in, this is your home too," Thomas said, surprised by his own words. The boy wandered through the vast living room, marveling at every detail. He stopped in front of a framed photo, Thomas standing beside the former president at a gala event. "You know the president?" he asked, wide-eyed. "Former president. And yes, we've met a few times," Thomas replied, remembering how these things impressed people. People like his son, who lived in a world completely removed from his own. After showing Matthew around the apartment, Thomas quickly set up a bed in the guest room. The boy showered in the Italian marble bathroom, put on one of Thomas's t-shirts that looked more like a dress on him, and got ready for bed. "If you need anything during the night, my room is right down the hall," Thomas said, feeling strange in the role of a father. Matthew nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Thank you for helping, Mommy," he said sincerely. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. "Why were you struggling? Doesn't your mother work?" "She does work. She's a teacher at a school. They're in our neighborhood," Matthew explained. "But she got sick and had to miss a lot of days. The principal really likes her, but said she couldn't keep paying her if she wasn't working. A teacher." Thomas wasn't surprised. Rachel had always dreamed of being an educator, even when everyone told her she could aim for more lucrative careers with her intelligence. "And you don't have any other family who could help?" he asked. Matthew shook his head. "Grandma. Abby passed away last year. It was just her, Mommy, and me." Thomas nodded, understanding the situation better. Mrs. Abigail, Rachel's mother, had been a widow since he'd known her. If she was gone, Rachel and Matthew truly had no one left. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's a new day," he said, tucking the blanket around the boy. When he closed the guest room door, Thomas felt the weight of everything that had happened that day. He needed a drink. He poured himself an expensive bourbon and stepped onto the balcony, gazing at the illuminated city below. His phone, which he had turned back on, buzzed incessantly with messages and missed calls, but he kept ignoring it. What would he do now? How would he explain to Lauren, to his parents, to his partners, that he had an 11-year-old son with an ex-girlfriend? How could Rachel have hidden this from him for so long? And why was she living in such poor conditions when he was swimming? In money? He took a long sip of bourbon, feeling the liquid burn his throat. In less than 24 hours, his perfect, carefully planned life had turned into complete chaos. And the most surprising part was that, despite the turmoil, a part of him felt strangely whole, as if a piece he never knew was missing had finally fallen into place. The next morning, Thomas woke to the sound of cautious footsteps in the apartment. For a moment he was confused, until he remembered the events of the previous day. He quickly got up and found Matthew in the kitchen, staring uncertainly at the imported coffee machine. "Good morning," Thomas said, making the boy turn around, startled. "Good morning," Matthew replied, a little embarrassed. "I wanted to make coffee for you as a thank you, but I couldn't figure out how this machine works." Thomas smiled. It was the first time someone had cared to do something for him without expecting anything in return. "Don't worry, I'll show you how it works and we can make coffee together." As they prepared breakfast, Thomas was surprised by the doorbell. It was too early for the housekeeper. "Who is it?" he asked through the intercom. "It's me, Thomas. We need to talk." Lauren's voice sounded irritated. Thomas hesitated, glancing at Matthew in the kitchen. "Now isn't a good time, Lauren." "I don't care if it's a good time or not. You cancelled a crucial meeting, ignored my calls, and Melissa told me you rushed out yesterday talking about a family emergency. What kind of family emergency could it be when your entire family is perfectly fine?" "I'm downstairs and I'm coming up." Before Thomas could respond, she hung up. He took a deep breath, bracing himself for the confrontation ahead. "Is that your fiancée?" Matthew asked, having overheard part of the conversation. "Yes," Thomas replied, trying to sound calm. "Listen, Matthew, she doesn't know about you yet. Can you stay in the room for a little while I talk to her?" The boy's eyes filled with hurt. "Are you ashamed of me?" The question hit Thomas like a slap. "No, of course not," he hurried to say. "It's just, this is a complicated situation. I need to explain things to her carefully." Matthew didn't look convinced, but nodded and went to the room. Minutes later, the private elevator announced Lauren's arrival. She stormed into the apartment, impeccably dressed in designer clothes, her hair and makeup flawless even at that early hour. "What's going on, Thomas?" she demanded, dropping her designer bag on the sofa. "Do you have any idea of the chaos you caused yesterday? The Japanese investors are threatening to pull out of the entire deal." "Lauren, something happened that's going to change a lot in our lives," Thomas began, searching for the right words. "What could possibly be so important?" she asked impatiently. Just then, the guest room door opened, and Matthew appeared in the hallway. Lauren stared at the boy, confused. "Who is this child?" she asked, looking from Thomas to Matthew. Thomas took a deep breath. "Lauren, this is Matthew, my son." The silence that followed was deafening. Lauren turned pale, her blue eyes darting between Thomas and the boy, searching for some sign that this was a bad joke. "You're what?" she finally managed to stammer. "My son," Thomas repeated more firmly. "I just found out yesterday, too." Lauren started laughing, a hysterical and humorless laugh. "This is ridiculous. You don't have kids. You would have told me if you had a son." "I didn't know, Lauren. His mother never told me. And you just believed it, just like that?" She looked at Matthew with suspicion. "It's obviously a scam. Someone found out you're about to close a billion-dollar deal and made up this absurd story." Matthew stepped back, hurt by Lauren's harsh words. "Lauren, that's enough," warned Thomas, with a firmness he rarely used with her. "Don't talk like that in front of the boy." "In front of the boy?" she repeated, incredulous. "You're actually taking this seriously. Look at you. You abandoned years of negotiations, left me worried, and all because of this?" She pointed at Matthew. "This has a name," Thomas replied, feeling his anger rise. "And yes, I'm taking it very seriously. He's my son, Lauren. Just look at us. You can see the resemblance." Lauren looked at Matthew again, this time more carefully. Despite all her denial, it was impossible not to see that the boy was practically a miniature version of Thomas. The same eyes, the same face shape, even the mannerisms were similar. "And his mother? Who is she?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Rachel Miller," Thomas answered. "We dated years ago before I met you." "Rachel?" Lauren repeated the name as if trying to connect it to a memory. Wait, is this that story your mother mentioned once? The broke college professor you dated? Thomas winced. That was exactly how his mother referred to Rachel, and hearing Lauren repeat those words hurt more than he expected. Yes, it's her, he replied curtly. And where is she now? Why did she decide to show up just when you're about to close the biggest deal of your life? She's in the hospital, Matthew interjected, his voice choked. She fainted because she didn't have food. That's why I called my dad. Lauren looked at the boy as if he were an alien. In the hospital, on whose dime? She turned to Thomas. Don't tell me you're paying for a private hospital for her. Of course I am, Thomas snapped. What did you expect me to do? Let the mother of my child die? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now back to the story, buses. You don't even know for sure he's your son, Lauren exclaimed. For God's sake, Thomas, wake up. This is clearly a scam. That woman probably heard about your success, coached the boy to say he's your son, and now she's faking an illness to get your money. My mom isn't faking, Matthew shouted, tears in his eyes. She didn't even want me to call. She never said she'd ask him for help. Lauren, I think you should leave, Thomas said, wrapping a protective arm around Matthew's shoulders. We can talk later when you've calmed down. Calm down? She laughed bitterly. You think I'll calm down? My fiancé shows up with a son no one knew existed, 3 months before our wedding, and you expect me to stay calm. You're getting married? Matthew asked, looking at Thomas in surprise. It was the plan, Thomas replied, avoiding Lauren's gaze. She grabbed her purse, furious. Was? So that's it? You're throwing away our relationship, our family's support, everything we built over some shady story? I'm not throwing anything away, Lauren. I just need time to figure out what's happening in my life right now. Time? She laughed bitterly. While you're figuring out your life, the Japanese are about to cancel the deal. Your father is having a heart attack worrying about what happened, and I'm being humiliated in front of... She pointed at Matthew again, unable to say his name. I'll handle all of this, Thomas assured her, staying calm. But right now, I need to take Matthew to see his mother at the hospital. Lauren shook her head in disbelief. You'll regret this, Thomas. Don't say I didn't warn you. With those words, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Thomas sighed, looking at Matthew, who seemed devastated by the argument. I'm sorry about that, he said, gently squeezing the boy's shoulder. She's in shock. She needs time to process. She doesn't like me, Matthew observed with a sadness beyond his years. She just doesn't know you yet, Thomas replied, trying to sound optimistic. Let's get ready to go see your mom at the hospital, okay? While Matthew showered, Thomas finally decided to face his phone. There were dozens of missed calls, urgent texts and emails. He ignored most of them, and only called Melissa, his secretary, to let her know he wouldn't be coming into the office that day either. Mr. Anderson, the Japanese are threatening to pull out of the deal, Melissa said anxiously. Mr. Tanaka said he's never seen such disrespect in a negotiation. Apologize on my behalf and tell them I'm dealing with a serious family emergency, Thomas instructed. Reschedule the meeting for Monday if possible. Monday, but that's 5 days from now. Exactly. I need that time, Melissa. And please don't forward any calls from Lauren or my parents to my cell today. Tell them I'm unavailable. After hanging up, Thomas felt a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in years, he was prioritizing something other than work and his family's expectations. And the most surprising part, he didn't feel guilty about it. At the hospital, they found Rachel already awake and visibly better. Her cheeks had a bit more color, and she was sitting up in bed eating a nutritious breakfast. When she saw Thomas and Matthew walk in together, her eyes filled with tears. Good morning, Thomas said awkwardly. Mom, Matthew exclaimed, rushing to hug her. You look better. Rachel held him tightly, looking over his shoulder at Thomas. Yes, I'm much better. The doctors are taking great care of me, she replied, her voice trembling. Matthew, sweetheart, could you go to the cafeteria and get me some juice? I need to talk to your father for a moment. The boy nodded, understanding the adults needed privacy. I'll bring orange juice, it's your favorite. When Matthew left, a heavy silence fell over the room. Rachel and Thomas stared at each other for long seconds, each trying to read the other's thoughts. "Why, Rachel?" Thomas finally asked, stepping closer to the bed. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" She sighed, adjusting herself against the pillows. "At first I was afraid. Later I thought it was too late." "Afraid? Afraid of what?" "Of everything, Thomas. What your family would do, what it would do to your career, the consequences for both of us." She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "When I found out I was pregnant, you were about to land that job at the development firm, remember? It was your big break. I had just lost my father, my mother was sick, I couldn't afford to stay in school." "That doesn't justify hiding a child from me for 11 years, Thomas exclaimed, louder than he intended. Rachel lowered her eyes. "I know. It was wrong. But after Matthew was born, your career took off. Suddenly you were in all the papers, the magazines, always with beautiful women at galas. What right did I have to show up with a child and disrupt his perfect life?" Thomas shook, his head frustrated. "It wasn't a perfect life, Rachel, it never was. It looked perfect from the outside," she said with a sad smile. "I used to show Matthew the articles, you know. I told him his father was an important man, doing great things." "And why now? Why did he call me now?" Rachel's face twisted with guilt. "I never wanted him to call, Thomas. It was desperation. He saw me faint and panicked. He found your number in a newspaper clipping I kept." "You kept clippings about me?" Thomas asked, surprised. "I did," Rachel admitted, blushing slightly. "To show Matthew. He always wanted to know about you. How could I deny him that?" Thomas ran his hands over his face, trying to process everything. "I'm trying to understand, Rachel, really, but it's a lot to take in." "I know, and I don't expect anything from you, Thomas," she said seriously. "If you want, you can do a DNA test to be sure. I understand. But know that I never asked for anything for myself. I just didn't want Matthew to grow up not knowing who his father was." "I don't need any test," Thomas replied, surprising himself. "Just look at him. It's like seeing a photo of me at 11. Rachel smiled, tears in her eyes. "He takes after you so much, not just in looks. He's smart like you, good with numbers, determined." "And you?" Thomas asked, changing the subject. "The doctor said you have a chronic condition. What's going on?" Rachel hesitated, as if she didn't want to talk about it. "Lupus," she finally said. "I found out 2 years ago. At first I managed it well with medication, kept working normally. But these past few months it's gotten worse. I started missing work a lot and, well, public schools can't keep teachers who are absent so often, no matter how much they want to." Thomas felt a pang of guilt. While he amassed fortunes, Rachel battled a chronic illness, raising their son alone. "Why didn't you ask for help? There are so many organizations." "I tried," Rachel interrupted with a hint of wounded pride. "But the wait lists are endless, the treatments available are basic, and I didn't want Matthew growing up seeing his mother as some pitiful charity case." Thomas secretly admired her strength. Rachel had always been like this, proud, independent, determined. Those were the qualities that had drawn him to her in the first place. "And now, what did the doctor say?" "That I need more aggressive treatment, expensive medication, frequent specialist visits," she sighed. "I know I can't afford it, but I'll find a way. I always do." "I'll pay for it," Thomas declared without hesitation, "and I won't hear any arguments. It's the least I can do after being absent for so long." Rachel seemed about to protest, but the door opened and Matthew walked in with a large glass of orange juice. "Here, Mum. Nice and cold, just how you like it." The boy's arrival temporarily ended the difficult conversation. As Thomas watched mother and son interact, he felt like an intruder in a perfect dynamic that had existed without him for over a decade. And yet, there was something there that called to him, that made him want to be part of it. Just then, his phone buzzed again. A message from his father. "We need to talk, it's urgent." Thomas ignored it, slipping the phone back into his pocket. The world outside, with its meetings, deals, and expectations, seemed increasingly distant and unimportant. After spending the morning with Rachel, Thomas and Matthew went out for lunch. The boy seemed more relaxed now that he knew his mother was okay. During lunch at a restaurant near the hospital, he bombarded Thomas with questions about his life, his work, and his preferences. Do you have a dog? Matthew asked while eating lasagna. No, Thomas replied, smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. I never had time to care for a pet. I've always wanted one, but Mom says our apartment is too small, Matthew commented with a resigned sigh. Plus, dogs cost money, right? With food and vaccines and all that. The casual way the boy spoke about financial limitations struck Thomas. In his world, money was never an issue. If he wanted something, he simply bought it. The thought that his own son had grown up counting every penny was painful. What else do you like to do? Thomas asked, eager to know his son better. I like math, like I said, and building things. I make robots out of scrap, I find. Matthew's eyes sparkled. Mom says I'm an engineer just like you. Thomas felt an unexpected surge of pride. An engineer? You want to be an engineer when you grow up? Yes, but I don't know if I can. College is expensive, right? Again, the early concern about money. Thomas silently vowed that from that moment on, Matthew would never have to worry about the cost of his dreams. If you want to be an engineer, you'll be the best engineer in the United States, Thomas declared with conviction. I'll show you my office one of these days. We have amazing projects there. Matthew's face lit up. Really? Can I see the real projects? Of course, Thomas assured him. Actually, he hesitated, struck by a sudden idea. How about we go now? We can stop by the office quickly, and then we'll come back to see your mom. Cool, Matthew exclaimed, nearly jumping. Out of his chair, Thomas smiled, realizing that for the first time in years he was genuinely excited to go to the office, not for work itself, but for the chance to impress his son. When they arrived at the imposing headquarters of Anderson Development in the financial district of New York City, Matthew was awestruck. The 40-story building with its mirrored glass facade was one of Thomas's most famous works, often featured in architecture magazines. In the lobby, the security guard looked surprised to see the boss accompanied by a child, but simply nodded respectfully. In the private elevator, Matthew laughed as the numbers quickly climbed to the 38th floor, where Thomas's office was. When the elevator doors opened, they ran into Melissa, who seemed distressed. Mr. Anderson, thank goodness you're here. Your father has been waiting for hours, furious, and the Japanese investors. She stopped mid-sentence upon noticing Matthew beside her boss. Her gaze flickered from the boy to Thomas, and an expression of understanding crossed her face. Good morning, Melissa, Thomas said, trying to sound casual. This is Matthew. Matthew, this is Melissa, my assistant. Hi, Matthew greeted shyly. Melissa smiled at the boy, clearly seeing the striking resemblance to her boss. Nice to meet you, Matthew. She turned back to Thomas, lowering her voice. Your father is in your office and he's furious, Thomas sighed. Let's get this over with. Come on, Matthew. When they entered Thomas's spacious office, Arthur Anderson, a commanding 70-year-old man, stood by the window, gazing at the city. Hearing the door, he turned, ready to unleash his anger, but froze at the sight of the boy. What is the meaning of this, Thomas? He demanded, staring at Matthew. Dad, this is Matthew, Thomas introduced, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. My son. Arthur Anderson paled. For a moment he seemed about to collapse, but quickly steadied himself, straightening his posture. Your son, he repeated, his voice controlled. And since when do you have a son? Since he was born 11 years ago, replied Thomas, keeping his calm. I only found out yesterday. Arthur looked at Matthew as if inspecting the defective part on an assembly line. Are you sure about this? Did you take a paternity test? I don't need a test, Dad, just look at him. Arthur stepped closer, studying Matthew's face intently. Who's the mother? He asked, not taking his eyes off the boy. Rachel Miller. Arthur's face hardened. That teacher? His tone dripped with disdain. I thought we'd moved past that phase of your life. Rachel is in the hospital, Dad, Thomas informed him, trying to hold back his irritation. She has lupus and was struggling. Arthur finally looked away from Matthew to face his son. And I assume you're now footing the bill for her treatment, he asked with a sardonic smile. How convenient that she showed up just as you're about to close the biggest deal of your career. Thomas felt Matthew stiffen under his hands. Matthew, why don't you ask Melissa to show you the project department? he suggested, wanting to spare the boy from the conversation. "I'm sure you'd love seeing the models." The boy seemed reluctant to leave but accepted the offer. When the door closed behind him, Thomas turned to his father. "Don't talk like that." "In front of him," he warned firmly. "He's just a child, and he's been through a lot in the last 24 hours. "And haven't we?" Arthur shot back. "Do you have any idea the damage you've caused? The Japanese investors are threatening to back out of the deal, Lorraine. Is devastated. Your mother is on sedatives, and all because of an obvious scam." "It's not a scam," Thomas replied, trying to stay patient. "Rachel never asked for anything. It was Matthew who called me, desperate because his mother had fainted from hunger. He didn't even know I was rich." Arthur let out a humorless laugh. "And you believed that? Thomas, you're smarter than this. That woman probably coached the boy, set this whole thing up to play on your emotions. She knows you've got a soft heart behind that businessman facade." "You don't know Rachel," Thomas defended. "She's the proudest person I've ever met. She'd never planned something like this." "Really? Then why did she keep newspaper clippings about you? Why did she teach the boy who you were?" Arthur shook his head, exasperated. "She was laying the groundwork, Thomas, just waiting for the right moment to strike." Thomas felt anger rising inside him. "Strike? She's sick, Dad. She has an autoimmune disease, can't work regularly anymore, lost her mother who was her only support, and still, she never reached out to me." "Exactly. Why didn't she reach out before? Why hide my grandson for 11 years? Arthur seemed genuinely hurt by the thought. Thomas hesitated. It was a fair question. "She said she was scared at first, scared of disrupting my career, scared of how the family would react." He paused, studying his father's expression. "And clearly she had every reason to be afraid." Arthur sat down, suddenly looking older and weary. "What do you plan to do now?" "I'll take responsibility. I'll pay for Rachel's treatment, make sure she and Matthew have everything they need, and I'll be present in my son's life." "And your marriage to Lauren? The plans we made?" Thomas sighed. "I don't know yet, Dad. I need time to sort this out." Arthur pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly displeased. "Thomas, think carefully. If you want, do a discreet DNA test. If the boy really is yours, we can work out an arrangement. Give generous child support. Pay for a good school. But keep your distance. Don't throw away everything we've built over a past mistake." His father's words hit Thomas like a punch. "A past mistake? Is that how your father saw Matthew? As a mistake to be managed? An inconvenience to be solved with money?" "Matthew is not a mistake," he declared firmly. "He's my son, and I'm going to be part of his life whether you accept it or not." Arthur stood up, adjusting his impeccable suit. "You're emotionally shaken right now. Let's give it time." He walked to the door but stopped before leaving. "Just don't make any rash decisions, son. Remember what's at stake." When he was alone, Thomas sat in his chair, exhausted. How could his life change so drastically in just one day? How could all his certainties prove so fragile? His gaze wandered around the luxurious office, over the awards, certificates, and photos with celebrities and important politicians. All that success, built over years, felt strangely empty now. What did any of it mean compared to the discovery that he had a son? The door opened again and Matthew walked in, his eyes shining with excitement. "Dad, I saw the models. They're amazing. The engineer showed me how you do the calculations, so the buildings don't collapse in earthquakes." "Dad." The word still sounded strange, but now it sent a wave of warmth through Thomas's chest. "You really liked it?" he asked, smiling. "Totally. I want to study hard so I can work with you one day." Matthew looked around the impressive office, admiring every detail. "Your office is incredible." Thomas looked at his empire with new eyes. Maybe after all, that success had a greater meaning than he'd imagined. Maybe it could be a legacy for his son. "One day all this could be yours," he said, surprising himself with how naturally the words came. The following days were a whirlwind. For Thomas, Rachel was discharged from the hospital, but was ordered to rest and undergo intensive treatment. Despite all her protests, Thomas insisted on renting a comfortable apartment in a safe neighborhood so she and Matthew could move in immediately. "I can't accept this. Rachel protested when Thomas showed her photos of the 3-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn Heights. "It's too much, Thomas." "It's not charity, Rachel," he argued. "It's my responsibility. I spent 11 years without being part of your lives. Let me do this." "But the rent must cost a fortune, and it's temporary. It doesn't make sense." "It's not rent. I bought the apartment," Thomas admitted, trying to sound casual. "You what?" Rachel looked shocked. "I bought it. For you. Consider it a belated birthday gift for Matthew." Rachel shook her head in disbelief. "Thomas, you can't just buy an apartment like that." "Why not?" he shrugged. "I can afford it and you need it. It's a good investment either way." The truth was, Thomas had done much more than buy an apartment. He'd hired a team of lupus specialists to care for Rachel, opened a generous account in Matthew's name to secure his education, and instructed his lawyers to begin the formal paternity recognition process. Meanwhile, his personal and professional life was in chaos. Lauren refused to answer his calls. His parents swung between anger and disappointment, and the Japanese investors threatened to back out of the deal if he didn't show more commitment. But surprisingly, Thomas didn't care as much as he should have. Something inside him had changed since meeting Matthew. His priorities had shifted. What once seemed crucial now felt superficial. A week after the fateful phone call, Thomas was in Rachel and Matthew's new apartment, helping them settle in. The boy ran from room to room, amazed by the space, the park view, and especially his own bedroom, something he'd never had before. "It's bigger than our whole old apartment," he exclaimed, jumping on the new bed. Rachel watched everything, with a mix of gratitude and discomfort. She still hadn't gotten used to the idea of living in such a luxurious place, bought with Thomas's money. "You didn't have to do all this," she said when they were alone in the spacious kitchen. "I wanted to," Thomas replied sincerely. "It feels good knowing you're both comfortable and safe." Rachel studied him for a moment. "You've changed, Thomas. You're not that ambitious young man I once knew." "I have," he agreed. "Success changed me, and not necessarily for the better. But Matthew reminded me of who I used to be. He has that effect on people." Rachel smiled with maternal pride. "He's a special boy. I'm so proud of him. And of you too, Rachel." Thomas looked her in the eyes. "You did an amazing job raising him alone." She looked away, emotional. "I did the best I could. It wasn't always easy." "I know, and I'm sorry I wasn't there." He hesitated. "Rachel, there's something I need to ask you, and I want you to be completely honest." She stared at him, apprehensive. "What is it? Why did you really disappear from my life? The whole truth?" Rachel paled. It was a question she had feared for years. "Thomas, that was so long ago. I need to know," he insisted. "Please." She took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "Your mother came to me when she found out I was pregnant." "My mother?" Thomas couldn't hide his surprise. "Yes. She offered me money to disappear from your life. Said I was ruining your bright future, that a child at that time would destroy everything your parents had planned for you." Thomas felt his blood run cold. Had his own mother interfered so cruelly? "And you took it?" he asked weakly. "No." Rachel seemed offended by the suggestion. "I refused the money, of course. I told her I'd tell you about the pregnancy no matter what. But then..." She hesitated. "Then what?" "She showed me proof that your father had gotten you that job at the construction company. Said if I told you about the baby, they'd withdraw their support and you'd lose the opportunity of a lifetime. Said you'd hate me for it, that you'd end up stuck in mediocre jobs, unhappy, blaming me for losing your dream." Thomas closed his eyes, feeling a wave of nausea. It was exactly the kind of manipulation his mother would pull. "Why didn't you come to me later, when I was already established?" Rachel gave a sad smile. "At first pride, then fear. And then you became too famous, too wealthy. You were in another world, Thomas. What place would I have in that life? What place would Matthew have?" Thomas felt a deep pain realizing how much time he'd lost, how many precious moments of his son's life had been stolen by interference and misunderstandings. "I'm so sorry, Rachel, for everything." "Don't blame yourself." She touched his arm lightly. We were both victims of circumstance. Just then, Matthew ran into the kitchen. "Dad, there's a pool in the building. Can we go swimming?" The sudden shift from serious conversation to childish excitement made them both smile. "Of course we can," Thomas replied. "But first, we need to buy you some swim trunks." "Awesome!" Matthew exclaimed before running off again. When they were alone, Thomas looked at Rachel. "I'm going to confront my mother about this. She needs to take responsibility." "It's not worth it, Thomas," Rachel advised. "That was so long ago. What matters is the present, what we do from here on out." "And what do you want from here on out?" Thomas asked hesitantly. Rachel sighed. "I want to heal, go back to work, give Matthew a good life. And I want you to be part of his life if that's what you want too." "That's what I want most," Thomas assured. "And what about us?" "Us?" Rachel seemed surprised by the question. "Yes, us. You and me." Thomas stepped closer. "Rachel, when I saw you again, even under those difficult circumstances, I realized I never completely forgot you. You were the love of my life." Rachel took a step back. "Thomas, don't complicate things. You're engaged. You have an established life. I'm grateful for everything you're doing for us, but I don't want to be responsible for more upheavals in your life." "What if I told you I already broke off the engagement with Lauren?" Thomas revealed. "We ended it yesterday." "What? Why?" "Because I realized I was living the life my parents planned for me, not the one I truly wanted. Lauren is a good person, but there was never real love between us. It was a convenient arrangement, an alliance between families." Rachel shook her head, looking stunned. "Thomas, you're making rash decisions. Everything is so recent. You're emotionally shaken. I don't want you to regret it later and blame me or Matthew." Thomas admired her wisdom. It was one of the qualities he had always loved in Rachel, her practicality, her ability to see beyond the moment. "You're right," he agreed. "Let's take it slow. What matters now is Matthew. The rest we can figure out in time." Rachel smiled, relieved. "Thank you for understanding." The following week, Thomas partially resumed his work routine, but with significant changes. He reduced his hours, delegated more responsibilities to his directors, and made sure to reserve every evening and weekend for Matthew. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The news about his son spread quickly in business circles. Some viewed it with sympathy, others with suspicion, but Thomas no longer cared about others' opinions. His priority was building a relationship with Matthew and ensuring Rachel received the best possible medical treatment. On Saturday, 2 weeks after the phone call that changed his life, Thomas took Matthew to meet his mother, Helen Anderson. Despite all the resentment he felt after discovering her interference in his past, he knew he couldn't deprive his son of knowing his grandmother. "Will she like me?" Matthew asked nervously as the car approached the Anderson mansion in Beverly Hills. "She'll adore you," Thomas assured, though he wasn't entirely sure. His mother was a complicated woman, driven by appearances and social status. Helen greeted them in the garden, impeccably dressed and made up, as if preparing for a social event rather than meeting her grandson. "So this is the boy," she said, studying Matthew with analytical eyes. "Come here, let me look at you." Matthew approached timidly, intimidated by the grandeur of the house and his grandmother's formal demeanor. "Hello, Mom," he greeted, politely. Helen studied his face for long seconds, and then something unexpected happened. Her eyes filled with tears. "My God, it's like seeing Thomas as a child again," she murmured, lightly touching her grandson's face. "You look just like your father at your age." To Thomas's surprise, his mother pulled Matthew into a tight hug. The boy, initially tense, gradually relaxed in her embrace. "Let's go inside. I prepared a special snack," Helen announced, leading Matthew by the hand into the house. "There's chocolate cake. Your father always loved it." Thomas followed, astonished by his mother's reaction. He had expected coldness, maybe even rejection, but never this immediate emotional acceptance. During the snack, Helen bombarded Matthew with questions about his likes, school and friends, showing a genuine interest she rarely displayed, even to those in her social circle. "Do you like piano, Matthew?" she asked at one point. "Your father played beautifully when he was a child." "I've never played," the boy replied. "My school doesn't have music classes." "Oh, that's unforgivable," Helen exclaimed. "Thomas, this boy needs piano lessons immediately. I'll call Professor Olivia. Does she still teach?" "Mom, relax," Thomas intervened, smiling at her enthusiasm. "Matthew might not be interested in piano." "I think it'd be cool to learn," the boy said, excited by the idea. "Then it's settled." Helen clapped her hands, pleased. "And what other activities do you enjoy, dear?" As Matthew talked about his interest in robotics and math, Thomas watched the scene with mixed emotions. It was unsettling to see his mother, usually so cold and calculating, showing so much affection for his son. When Matthew went out to explore the garden after snack time, Thomas confronted his mother. "Why, Mom?" he asked directly. "Why did you push Rachel away when you found out she was pregnant?" Helen paled. "Who told you that?" "Rachel did, and I want to hear your side." Helen sighed, suddenly looking older. "I did what I thought was best for you, son. You were too young, just starting your career. A child at that time would have ruined your plans." "That wasn't your decision to make," Thomas retorted, trying to control his anger. "He was my son, my responsibility, my choice." "You would have given up everything for her, Thomas. I knew your soft heart." Helen gave a sad smile. "You would have quit that job at the development company for a more modest one with hours that fit family life. You would have settled for a mediocre little life, living in a small apartment, struggling to pay bills." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "And what's wrong with that? Maybe I would have been happier." "You say that now when you already have everything," Helen replied with a condescending tone. "But back then it would have been different. Your father's dream was always to build an empire, and you were the centerpiece of that dream." "So that's it. I was just a tool to fulfill Dad's dream." "Don't be unfair, Thomas. You wanted success too. You've always been ambitious since you were little." Thomas rubbed his face, exhausted by the conversation. 11 years. Mom, I lost 11 years of my son's life because of your interference." Helen looked out the window, watching Matthew play in the garden. "I'm sorry, son, truly. At the time, it seemed like the right decision." She turned back to him. "But if it's any comfort, you can make up for lost time now. He's a wonderful boy." Thomas hadn't expected this acknowledgement from her. "I thought you'd reject him, see him as a threat to your perfect plans." Helen smiled weakly. "Years ago, maybe. But now," she hesitated. "Thomas, ever since your father had his first heart attack last year, I've been thinking a lot about what really matters in life. George and I built an empire, yes, but at what cost? We don't have real friends, just business partners and useful contacts. Your father can barely sleep without medication. And you never seemed truly happy, despite all the success." Thomas was surprised by this self-reflection from his mother, usually so certain of her decisions. "So you don't object to Matthew being part of our family?" "Object?" Helen chuckled softly. "Thomas, he's my grandson, my own flesh and blood. How could I reject him? Besides," she paused, "I've always dreamed of being a grandmother, and since you and Lauren never seemed interested in starting a family, I thought that dream would never come true." Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. At least Matthew would have his grandmother's support, despite their complicated history. "And what about Rachel?" he asked, testing the limits of his mother's new attitude. Helen made a face. "One thing at a time, son, one step at a time." When they returned to Rachel's apartment at the end of the day, Matthew couldn't stop talking about the mansion, the garden, and especially his grandmother, who had promised to take him to a classical music concert the following week. "She said she'll introduce me to the conductor," the boy exclaimed excitedly. "And she's going to give me a digital piano so I can start practicing." Rachel looked at Thomas with concern. "A piano? Isn't that too much?" "Let my mother spoil her grandson a little," Thomas replied with a smile. "She's genuinely enchanted by him." When Matthew went to take a shower, Rachel moved closer to Thomas. "How did it really go? Your mother didn't hate me." "Surprisingly, your name never came up," Thomas admitted. I think she's focusing on Matthew for now. And believe it or not, she seems truly sorry for interfering in the past. Rachel looked skeptical. From what I remember, your mother was never the type to regret anything. People change, Thomas reflected. I've changed. You've changed. Maybe she's changing too. In the months that followed, Thomas's life found a new balance. His work remained demanding, especially after successfully restructuring the deal with the Japanese investors, but now he had something far more important to come home to: his family. Matthew adapted quickly to his new reality. Enrolled in one of the best schools in New York City, he flourished academically, especially in science and math. The piano lessons, initially a whim of Helen's, revealed a genuine talent in the boy, and his dream of becoming an engineer like his father seemed more tangible than ever. Rachel, meanwhile, responded well to treatment. With top specialists managing her lupus, she achieved some stability, though the doctors warned it would be a chronic condition requiring lifelong care. The relationship between Thomas and Rachel progressed slowly. There was obvious affection between them, a shared history, and now a son who bound them together. But both were cautious, aware of how far their lives had drifted apart. On a rainy June evening, 6 months after the phone call that changed their lives, Thomas arrived at Rachel and Matthew's apartment for one of their regular weekly dinners. But this time he seemed especially nervous. "What's wrong?" Rachel asked as she set the table. "Did something happen at work?" "No, everything's fine," Thomas assured her. "I'm just a little anxious. I need to talk to both of you about something important." Matthew, who was helping his mother in the kitchen, looked worried. "Is it something bad?" "No, champ, quite the opposite. I hope it's good news for all of us." Throughout dinner, Thomas seemed distracted, answering Matthew's questions about his day automatically. When they finished eating, he finally stood up, took a deep breath, and pulled a small box from his pocket. 12 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life by letting you walk away, Rachel," he began, kneeling before her. "It took a desperate phone call from our son for me to realize how much time we've lost and how much we can still build together." Rachel brought her hands to her mouth, tears already forming in her eyes. "Thomas, what are you doing?" "I'm asking for a second chance," he replied, opening the box to reveal a diamond ring. "Not just for us, but for our family. Rachel Miller, would you marry me and complete the family we started so long ago?" Matthew let out a joyful shout. "Say yes, Mom, say yes." Rachel laughed through her tears, looking from her excited son to the man kneeling before her. "Are you sure about this, Thomas? It's a big step." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," he assured her. "I thought long and hard before making this decision. It's not impulsive, it's not out of obligation, it's not out of guilt. It's out of love, for you, for Matthew, for the family we can be." Rachel took a deep breath, wiping away her tears. "Yes," she answered, her voice trembling. "Yes, I accept." Thomas placed the ring on her finger, and Matthew ran to hug them both. "Now we're a real family," the boy exclaimed, beaming. "We always were," Rachel corrected, kissing her son's forehead. "It's just that now we're complete." The wedding, held 3 months later, was an intimate celebration in a small chapel in Montauk, a town near New York City where Rachel had grown up. Despite Helen's insistence on a grand affair, Thomas and Rachel preferred something simple, surrounded only by close friends and family. Matthew, proud in his role as ring-bearer, was overjoyed to see his parents finally together. To everyone's surprise, even Arthur, who had initially resisted the idea of his son marrying Rachel, seemed genuinely moved during the ceremony. After their honeymoon in the Hawaiian Islands, the new Anderson family settled into a spacious home in Westchester, with a large backyard where Matthew could play and finally have the dog he'd always dreamed of. One afternoon, a year after the phone call that changed everything, Thomas came home early and found Rachel in the garden, watching Matthew play with Thunder, the stray they'd adopted from a shelter. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, embracing her from behind. "About how life takes unexpected turns," she replied, leaning into him. "A year ago, I was fainting from hunger in the kitchen of our tiny apartment. Today, I'm here with everything I've ever dreamed of." "We lost our way for a long time," Thomas reflected, "but Matthew brought us back together, That desperate phone call ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me." Rachel smiled, turning to face him. "You know I kept that old red telephone? It's our family relic now." Thomas laughed, gazing lovingly at their son playing happily with the dog. "Who knew a simple call could change so many lives, huh?" At the Anderson Development Office, framed on a prominent wall, there was now a constant reminder of that transformation. The old red telephone, accompanied by a discreet plaque that read, "Daddy, Mommy fainted because she has no food," the call that saved our family. And whenever Thomas looked at that phone, he remembered that sometimes you have to lose everything you thought was important to discover what truly matters. End of story. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to start over. Leave a comment telling us if you've ever received a call that changed your life. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.